10 years after the environmental catastrophe of Deepwater Horizon, the United States seemed to have suppressed the memory of the catastrophic consequences weakly regulated offshore drilling can have. The Trump government is cutting back on tighter security regulations from the Obama administration on maritime oil extraction. The Deepwater Horizon was a semi-submersible, finest of its kind offshore drilling rig. British Petroleum, a multinational billion-dollar company specializing in oil extraction, leased the platform from 2001 to 2013. In its history of exploiting offshore oil fields, the Deepwater Horizon broke several records, drilling the deepest oil well in history in the Macondo oil prospect off the coast of Louisiana, in the Gulf of Mexico at a depth of 10,680 meters below sea level. This is also where the second, much sadder record was broken. After a serious accident, the oil prospect became the biggest maritime oil spill in history. On April 20th, 2010, mere hours before the accident happened and the crisis unfolded, Transocean, the company who ran the rig, was awarded for its safety record. The laborers at sea and their managers celebrated 7 years without a major accident. That same night, a blowout of masses of gas and petroleum under high pressure from the undersea oil prospect blasted through cement plugs that were installed to seal off the well. The explosive mix mounted a drilling pipe and led to an explosion which resulted in the death of 11 workers and in unprecedented environmental and social destruction. Mike Williams, chief electronics technician on the Deepwater Horizon, upon whom the protagonist of the 2016 Hollywood blockbuster movie Deepwater Horizon was based, gives some valuable insight into the lack of precautions and work conditions on the isolated drilling rig prior to the catastrophe. He testifies of immense pressure on the workers from the BP managers due to the drilling being 5 weeks behind schedule. The drilling cost BP $1 million a day, a fact that was made known to the workers on several occasions. The immense pressure from the transnational corporation also manifested itself in the neglect of safety procedures and deliberate ignoring of signs announcing an imminent blowout. The quality of the cement plugs, which closed off the high-pressure reservoir, was not evaluated as prescribed. This was considered to be too time-consuming. And more importantly, the blowout preventer, an essential device that functioned as a manual and autonomous kill switch on the seabed that would cut and seal the oil pipe in case of a blowout and thus protect the drilling rig, was known to have several defects. Disregarding all these red flags, the BP managers pushed to go on. Oceanography and environmental humanities provide interesting theoretical approaches to analyze the aforementioned case. Turbulent materialities is a concept used by oceanographer Steinberg to describe the uncontrollable natural forces at work in maritime environments. Adapting this conception of the oceans to the context of resource extraction, Kosmatopoulos talks of turbulent mineralities. The exploitation of these mineralities, here in the form of an oil prospect, and the sheer brute force released in the form of compressed energy, can have environmental, social, fiscal, and geopolitical implications that have to be considered diligently before touching them. In turbulent environments, more than 1,000 meters below sea, one should proceed in an extreme, diligent manner. The lack of knowledge of what is exactly happening on the ocean floor in midst of a huge pressure level and the fluid nature of the ocean constitutes a central feature of turbulent mineralities. In her exposé about mustard gas legalities in the Gotland Deep, Neymanis develops a highly relevant concept to deep-sea extractionism: suspense. She quotes environmental humanist Stacy Alaimo to define this concept. Suspension is to hold in an undetermined or undecided state awaiting further information. She also refers to the state of suspension as a precautionary principle. Suspension is a pause in action in circumstances of incomplete information with a possible impending threat. Drilling a high-pressure oil prospect at 1,200 meters below sea level is exactly such an environment. Receiving contradictory signs from different instruments of a mounting pressure in the drilling pipe prior to the blowout on Deepwater Horizon should have halted the crew in their pursuit to finish their job and to seal off the oil reservoir as soon as possible. The fast, profit-driven extraction industry does not allow for a concept like suspense. While situations of suspense are most natural and in some cases permanent, they stand in blunt opposition to the capitalist extractionalist rationale of increasing efficiency. 4 months later, when BP finally managed to seal the leak, approximately 4.9 million barrels of crude oil had already leaked into the Gulf of Mexico. The damage done to the highly complex marine and coastal ecosystem was devastating. To clean up the huge oil spill, BP used a chemical oil dispersant called Corexit. It solidifies the oil into drops or tar balls that sink and would eventually facilitate the organic degradation of oil by marine life. Michelle Murphy refers to this irresponsible use of chemical agents as the chemical regime of the living. Humans and their environment have already been profoundly altered through chemicals released into nature since early industrial development, with no respect to possible and unforeseen negative effects on humans and non-humans in the future. The actual effects this chemical regime of the living has on organic and non-organic life manifests itself with some delay. With no consistent research on the negative effect of Corexit on organisms before its massive use, BP did not hesitate to spray more than 6.5 million liters of dispersant on the oil spill. 10 years later, the human and non-human communities in and around the Gulf of Mexico can still feel the effects of the applied chemical regime. There's scientific research on the devastating impact on marine life and a lot of anecdotal evidence from Louisiana coast inhabitants. Fishermen and communities living off the sea all blame BP's Corexit for permanent skin irritations, temporary memory loss, and other pains. The chemical regime of the living tends to burden future generations and marginalized communities with their negative externalities. Even if those get discovered in retrospect, there is no legal framework to hold states or multinational corporations accountable for the damage done. In order to deconstruct the dominant discourse in the United States, the 2016 Hollywood blockbuster tells its audience what narrative the world should retain about the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Most revealing is the movie's vision of nature, and the assemblage of crude oil and gas, which is in their natural form under high pressure, is constantly referred to as the monster. The upcoming fight between man and monster is announced when the protagonist's daughter tells her dad to go tame the monster and to bring her back a dinosaur fossil. This systematic referencing to the subsea oil prospect as the monster which the workers must tame or have awakened is also employed by the drilling specialists. By attributing neutral natural resources a monstrous identity, the responsibility for the catastrophe is shifted from anthropogenic causes to malicious natural power that killed 11 men. This metaphorical fight of good against evil gets elevated into a religious fear when the survivors, having escaped the Leviathan, say the Lord's Prayer to a background of the burning oil rig. For 107 minutes, the film fails to mention any reason as to why the monster had been awakened. Humans having to dig up oil is portrayed as an eternal law of nature. Forced extractionism as an inherent necessity of a fossil fuel-driven global capitalist economy is not an issue. While BP's greed is addressed, the movie refrains from critically assessing the phenomenon of offshore drilling. The striking neglect of environmental criticism culminates in a brief and thus cynical mention of the Deepwater Horizon as the worst oil spill in US history. While the movie extensively mourns the 11 victims of the disaster, there is no mention of the environmental damage. The same goes for coastal communities and the long-term social costs local residents have to bear. The story's plot focuses exclusively on the devastating loss of 11 crewmen of the Deepwater Horizon. This narrative excludes any reference to the sustainable damage offshore drilling does to marine and territorial life. Cutting out the long-term negative consequences of any sort in this piece of pop culture may have been helpful for the Trump administration in dismantling offshore regulations only 9 years after they were put in place to prevent likewise disasters.